Welcome to the Independent Surfer, where we talk about all things learning to surf. In this video, we're going to review a video of high-level intermediate surfing, and I'm going to go over the 5 common mistakes that intermediate to advanced surfers make, or the 5 common mistakes that intermediate surfers make who want to become advanced surfers. I like to think that surfing is a lot like a maths equation. If you get the first step wrong as you're subbing in the variables, then you're going to get the rest of the steps wrong. So it's really important for you to get that first step right. And that leads me to the first common mistake that I see a lot of intermediate surfers make, and that is looking down the line. So as we get into this video, we can see that as this specific person is popping up, they're ending up in a situation where they're having to look to the person to the inside, but then afterwards don't look down the line as they're riding the wave. Now, while it is distracting to have other people around you while you're surfing, it's really important to make sure that you look down the line regardless of those distractions. So, as I mentioned before, paying attention to what's happening, say, on your inside or close to the peak of the wave, and then as you've made sure that you've paid attention to that and that's not a threat or a disturbance to you on the wave, you need to then be really aware that you need to look down the line to pick your point, because as they say, where you look is where you're going to go. So in this case, I'd just like to play the wave so you can see what we're talking about. And here, as you can see, as this person gets into the wave, they're looking at the person on the inside, in fact, potentially not even looking down at the board. And then as they're getting up on the wave, they're looking down the line, but it seems more as if their gaze is closer towards, it seems as though their gaze is closer towards the bottom of the wave, rather than looking up towards the top. So I'll show you exactly where you should be looking in this case, in all cases anyways. You really want to find yourself not looking down here, but rather looking to this direction, trying to pick your point around here. If you end up looking down here, then whatever is happening in this general direction is always going to be a surprise to you. So the best way I can describe it is if you're playing catch with somebody, and they throw the ball at you while you're looking in the opposite direction, and all of a sudden at the last minute you're going to look at the ball coming towards you. It's going to be really hard to react to the situation. And so it's the same in surfing. You want to make sure that your gaze, even when you're getting up, even when you're paddling in, is constantly eyeing the section so that you can pick your timing right, as well as make sure that you go to that specific direction. And then that carries on through the whole wave. You should be eyeing that section the whole time. And in this case, I would just say that he is only now starting to look at that section. So if we go again, he's getting up, he's looking, and he's not looking, he's not looking, he's not looking. And now he's looking to the direction he wants to go. And he's able to then go in that direction. So that's pretty much it for that tip. Looking down the line as you're getting up on the wave will help you act to the situation, give you a better chance at doing a turn in the area that you want to then do a turn. The next tip we're going to go over, and this one is also from the pop-up, again, the whole maths equation thing. Where you land your foot or where you land your feet on the board is going to make a big difference to how the board reacts. So in this case, as he's getting up, and each wave is completely different. In this case, as he's getting up, he is getting straight into his bottom turn. Now, in some cases, you're not going to go straight into your bottom turn. In certain situations, you may want to pump down the line, and in that case, your feet placement or foot placement is going to be slightly different. But in this case, as he's getting up, he wants to go straight into his bottom turn to come up and do a turn. So I'd like to just highlight where his both front and back feet are. The first thing I want to highlight is that he has slightly got his front foot over to one side of the rail. So you can see more or less over here where I've drawn my little circle. It's a little hard to see, sorry about that. So in this case, if we have a really close look at where his front foot is placed, it's over to one side of the rail. Now, ideally, you want to always land your front foot in the center of the board. So more or less across the center line, the stringer of the surfboard. And in this case, he's landing his front foot slightly to the right of the board. And while, in certain situations, it's totally okay. Like, if you're in a pig dog stance and you're trying to get barreled, landing your front foot to that side of the board is actually not such a bad thing. But in the case that you want to do turns and lean over onto the rail, it can become a bad thing. And in this case it is, because you'll notice as he comes to do his first turn, right here, he bogs the rail a little bit, and you can actually see how much water is splashing up off of his front foot. And this is bad because you're going to create a lot of resistance and slow yourself down. So you really need to make sure that you are landing your front foot in the right place. The next thing that I want to discuss with foot placement, and this is kind of like a bonus extra tip, is that as you're landing your feet, when you're landing your feet to do turns, and as you're getting up, you're choosing to do a turn right away, you want to land your back foot over the pad. And even in this case, land your front foot slightly further back as well. So if we look here, we can see that his back foot is over the pad, but it's very far forward off the pad. Or not off the pad, but very far forward towards the front of the pad. The further back you get that back foot, the more control you're going to have over the surfboard if you're applying front foot pressure, but that's a whole nother thing to chat about. And in that case, the closer you have your foot to that kicker, the easier it's going to be for you to turn the board. So having your front foot further forward is going to make it a little bit more difficult to get that turn in. And as well as having both feet placed quite forward, as you're putting a lot of front foot pressure to then turn, what will happen is that you start to engage too much of the rail of the surfboard, and then that also then slows you down. So in your bottom turn, you don't want to engage too much of the rail of the surfboard because you're already slowing yourself down. So that concludes the second tip for today of the 5 tips for intermediate surfers, is that you need to really make sure that your foot placement is on point. And this you can practice at home. That's the greatest thing about the pop-up, is you don't have to always practice it in the water, because we get so few chances out in the water that it makes it difficult for us to practice, as well as we have all this distracting information that then causes us to build bad habits. So practice the pop-up at home. So the third tip that I'd like to go over of our 5 tips for intermediate surfers is talking about your body movement, how dynamic you are in the water. And so if you want to become an expert surfer, or if you want to become a high level or advanced surfer, then one of the biggest things that will help you do that is making sure that you're very dynamic in your movement. And specifically what I'm talking about in this case is, it sounds a little weird, but wiggling yourself to do a little bit of speed generation in between each turn. So in that case, or in this case specifically, you can see how he's getting to the bottom of the wave and going up to the top in a very nice clean line that he draws. So he's drawing a very clean line going from the bottom to the top. Now, while that is ideal in an ideal scenario, as you're getting better at surfing, especially on smaller, softer waves, you really need to generate your own speed. So being more dynamic in your movement. And this requires a few speed pumps between each turn. Now, while it's not as aesthetically pleasing and potentially scores you less points in the long run, it could also score you more points in the long run if we're talking about competition surfing. Because ideally drawing those perfect lines between each turn looks very aesthetic. However, on small waves, it's hard to do that. On bigger waves, they give you a lot of push, and so it's a lot easier. And in that case, you're trying to actually slow yourself down to be able to do turns. But in this case, you want to get a speed pump, so being more dynamic in your movement as you're getting up on the board, picking your point and trying to get there as quick as you can by having a slight speed generation through the bottom turn. And that basically concludes for the third tip that I'm going to give you guys today for intermediate surfers, is that you need to be more dynamic as you get up on the surfboard. If you're too static, then you're going to lose a lot of speed in the bottom turn, especially on smaller waves. So I'd just like to show that again one last time, just to conclude. As he's getting up, he's very static in his movement. Although he rotates his shoulders quite nicely, he's a little too static as he's coming towards the top of the wave, and then has to reset and come for the next turn here. So one thing I would like to highlight that this gentleman is doing exceptionally well through this turn, and it makes like a lot of people end up in this situation. Just to go off of our topic quickly, as he's getting up and riding here, you can see that he has each hand over each rail, one over there, and that's really important to, especially on the backhand, to try and square up your shoulders as you're getting up on the board. If you end up in a situation where you have, which is very common, where you have both hands over the same rail, then it makes it very difficult for you to then rotate your shoulders to get up towards the top of the wave. You end up in a position where you're side on, and it's hard to manage yourself in that position. So that leads me to my fourth tip. As you're getting up on the surfboard, make sure that you get up with your shoulders relatively square to the board. And what that means is you want to make sure that your shoulders and hips aren't facing directly to that direction. So in the opposite direction that you want to go. The most ideal scenario is that you have your shoulders facing at a 45-degree angle to the surfboard, or even facing in almost the same direction that the nose of the board is facing, so that in that case, you're able to then rotate your body and start in that direction, and also lean over. One of the biggest reasons why you shouldn't have both hands over the same rail is because when you lean over to do your turn, you want to weight with one arm and counterweight with the other arm, so that you're not just leaning over and then falling. And so that then concludes the fourth tip for intermediate surfers. Our 5 tips is that as you get up, you want to have each hand over each rail and make sure that you're ending up in a position where you're square to the board and not side onto the board. Cool. And then the last tip that I'm going to go over today for intermediate surfers is chatting about using your arms to help rotation and momentum in this case. So in this case, I'm just going to kind of go through this video quickly, and I'm going to play him surfing the wave all the way through. Then I'm going to talk about, exactly what we're supposed to be talking about. So I just want to say that he does a great job to do turns and surf this wave very well, but there's something that he's lacking, and that's both extension and compression in the knees, as well as movement in the upper body, specifically his arms. So the first thing I want to talk about is his right arm. So his right arm here is extremely static. And I mean, in this case, both his arms are quite static, but ideally, as you're coming out of your bottom turn, you want to extend and open this shoulder, so this right arm shoulder, to help you rotate up towards the top of the wave. And if you don't do this, you're going to end up in a situation where your board is still facing at a 90-degree angle, as it does for him here. So you can see that as he comes up to the top, his board is still facing that's maybe like 9 o'clock as he's coming up to do his turn. And ideally in most cases or most scenarios, you want to get your board more vertical up towards the top of the wave. And here, as for his first turn, he does have an opportunity to do that. Or in this case, if he wanted to choose to do a different turn, I mean, this is going off topic, but I'll come back to it in a moment. In this case, as he's coming out towards the shoulder, you always have to choose what kind of turn you want to do. And in this case, he's choosing to do a snap, but the wave is kind of giving him an opportunity to rather do a cutback. But if we had to choose to do a snap, initially in the bottom turn is what we're talking about right now, is that you need to move your arms more in a better way. And in this case, this left arm, you want to try and open the shoulder up towards the direction of where you're going, as well as your gaze needs to rotate to that direction as well. So in this case, you'll notice where his arm is pointing and where his gaze is pointing and his shoulders are pointing is instead of it being over here, which is a really good section, or over here, he's more looking at this general area over here, and that's going to make a big difference in the type of turn you're going to be able to do. So if we continue to play this through, we will notice that now he's coming up towards the top of the wave, and ideally he would be doing his turn closer to the pocket, trying to meet this section, but instead he's coming out to this general area. And more advanced surfing would be to try and meet this general section that's coming up towards you here, or even be in between to do your turn here instead, but instead he's coming out towards the shoulder. And that's because this arm is not opening up the shoulders and rotating towards that direction. He's doing a very good job to bring this arm across his body, which is great. But as I said before, that leading arm really needs to open up to the direction you want to go, more or less. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time getting that board to change its direction to go, instead of in that way, up more vertical towards the top of the wave. So again, if we just watch this one more time, he's coming out towards the shoulder, and he's never really opened this left arm. So pay attention to, his right arm. So pay attention to his right arm. He never really opens it, always keeping the shoulders closed and not allowing him to go up towards the top of the wave. All right, so you need to open this arm and bring it up and over to the direction that you want to go, and then that's going to help you get there. And as I said before, if you don't do this, you're just not going to get there. So that concludes the 5 tips for intermediate surfers that want to become advanced surfers. Don't get me wrong, this gentleman, he surfs very, very well, and I appreciate you sending over this video. If you want us to review a video for you, you can send it over to us through our newsfeed on our website, www.independentsurfer.com. All you have to do is make a profile, it's totally free, and engage in our community by sending over your videos for review, and we will review your video for free and post it on there and on YouTube for everyone to see, if you don't mind us doing that. And in this case, the way he could do this a lot better is, again, just to recap, number 1, landing the feet in the right place, or number 1 would actually be looking down the line to start. Number 2, landing the feet in the right place. Number 3, being more dynamic in your movement. Like, it's so important to be as dynamic as possible in your movement. Number 4 would be to have those shoulders in the right place as you're getting up, as he does in this situation, making sure your shoulders are nice and square to the board when you're getting up, making sure you're not side on. And number 5 would be just using those arms a little bit more to create some more rotation, momentum, and to allow you to set a specific direction that you want to go in. Thanks for listening today, and I hope this video helped you, and we'll see you next time.